Good morning, Professor Tanzi, and good evening to one and all. So it's home. Professor Tanzi is, it's home for you. NIPFP, its association is long term. A decade back, you were here in Delhi to deliver, the Rajachalaya Memorial Lecture. And, the faculty members do remember that moment. And our former director also joined, and our director, Professor Pinaki Chakraborty, is here. So it's our absolute privilege and pleasure and honor to have you today at NIPFP to deliver this, lecture on economic theory, uncertainties, and globalization of public good. And it is so contextual, as you rightly mentioned. It's like a prelude talk to your important work on fragile futures, and especially in the context of the pandemic, the climate change crisis, and disasters. And for young scholars, of course, you need no introduction among us, but for the young scholars, I take a minute to introduce you. Professor Tanzi was with IMF for around 2 decades. He was director at Fiscal Affairs Department of IMF, and he mentioned that he's with American University, Washington, D.C. He's a professor and he was economics chair there. And he was also with the Italian government. He was undersecretary to, economics and finance department, the division in the Italian government. And of course, we scholars met him every year when we went to present our paper, in the International Institute of Public Finance. We met him in different cities in Tampere. Last we met in Glasgow in 2019. And he's honorary president at International Institute of Public Finance, Munich. And so without much delay, we are all excited to have you here, and over to you, Professor Tanzi.
Thank you very much, Lekha. As you know, I've been associated with with Indian National Institute for a long time, from the time of Rajachalaya and to Partosham and to various followers. I was a visitor there one time. I enjoyed very much to give the Rajachalaya lecture also, and we had 2 terrific weeks in Delhi, myself and my wife at that time, about 10 years ago. And anyway, let me go to this book. I gave you a little bit of a background of this book, that when the pandemic came, I realized that there was something in economics which didn't seem to fit, And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, and I've written a few papers along there making this point, that classical economics was very much influenced by Darwinian ecology, that things develop smoothly, one little bit at a time, the people realize that, of course, that there are risks in life. There are there are risk of getting ill, of dying, of having accidents, and so forth. So we develop, in a way, develop insurance companies that you can buy an insurance and protect yourself against the risk. That unfortunately, beside the risks which are statistically quantifiable, you can determine more or less with some mistakes that Keynes emphasized in a book written in 1921, that there were mistakes in making this calculation. You have black swans that appear out of nowhere, and so they are also they are also uninsured. How do you call the uncertainties that appear? No, and uncertainties were never really dealt with either by economic theory or by government. Uncertainties are acts of God that come out of nowhere, and the pandemics is one of them. And you realize when you study economics closely, you realize that all the attention has gone to risks and almost none to uncertainties, you know? And, uh, and well, but uncertain events do exist, you know? And in the book, there is a part of the book, a second part of the book, that describes historically uh, events of which have created major disaster, pandemics over time, and epidemics, famines. India has suffered from them. Great floods, that have killed millions of people, and so forth. So for this kind of things, there's been really very little either theorizing or policy. When these things come, we are always unprepared. When the pandemics, the current pandemic came, all countries were unprepared for it. And they did not know what to do. Look at the reaction of my president in the U.S., previous president. And so that this has created an important problem. These acts of God were essentially ignored. One can make the point that in the past, if you go back hundreds of years, the governments would have had neither the money to do anything about the anticipation of these uncertain events, nor the trained personnel. But this is no longer the case today. Many countries spend 50% of their GDP, and the education has increased dramatically, so that in theory you could do something about these uncertain events. By the way, the distinction between risk and uncertain events came from a book also in 1921, the same years when Keynes had written his book on probability, came from a book by Frank Knight, who became a very important professor at the University of Chicago. And he made the clear, sharp distinction between risk, which were quantifiable. Lloyd of London had started quantifying risk two centuries ago, and uncertainties which were not quantifiable. If you live in San Francisco, you know that an earthquake can happen. If you live in Tokyo or in Japan, you know that a tsunami can happen, but you have no way of calculating the risk, and so that this is the a general conclusion of the book, in a kind of general conclusion, is that we have probably invested too much on protecting ourselves against risks. And when I look at myself, I've been paying insurance on my house, on this house. I've lived in this house for 51 years. For 51 years, I've been paying insurance. I've never asked 1 cent from the insurance company. So clearly, there's been overinvestment in risk events and underinvestment in uncertainties. So this is the problem. Well, some insurance companies, Swiss Re, which is a big insurance company, they have started thinking about this. And recently they introduced an insurance against volcanic eruptions. You could, if you are in the hotel business, or you could buy insurance if you are. It turns out that a lot of people are within a not far great distance from volcanoes, so that they've tried to introduce this volcanic insurance against volcanic eruption, and I don't know how many people have taken care of that. The one aspect that is stressed in the book is that as time passes, life expectancy of people has become longer and longer. We used to live 30 years. Now I'm 86 years old. I'm still alive, and so the longer the life expectancy, the more likely is that you will live. through one of these uncertain events, so that really the fact that life expectancy has increased implies that we should be paying more attention to this uncertain event. One aspect which is also emphasized in the book is that there is some sort of irrational behavior on the part of the people. People seem to underplay uncertain events and overplay risky ones. And it goes back to the same argument that I made before, that we overinvest in risk events and underinvest in uncertain events. To give you 2 or 3 current examples, when Boeing, they developed this new plane that crashed twice within a few months, the engineers of Boeing were aware that there were some problems, and I want to believe that these were decent people that were intentionally would not have put their wife or their mother in a plane that would be unsafe. But probably they believe that, well, this was so uncertain, so far away, that nothing will happen. When in Italy there was a famous bridge in Genoa collapsed during a storm 2 or 3, 4 years ago, and about 50 people died. This bridge was known that this bridge had problems, But again, people said, well, the bridge has been there for 70 years, nothing has happened. It's very unlikely that anything will happen soon. So when this building in Florida collapsed, about a couple of months ago, which sadly there was a close friend of ours in that building that died in it. They knew that the building has some structural problem, but again, the cost to do something about would be immediate. The danger is postponed and highly uncertain. So there is a kind of irrational behavior, which I think behavioral economics, which is very important today, should study, should analyze much more than now. The book I've been talking about, well, talks about this thing. As I said, describes a lot of events in history, from the big plague in Athens during the time of Pericles, to big plagues in Rome, and a big plague in Constantinople, and these events which had the catastrophic results in history. And there's a large description of that. Describes also atomic accidents. The three actually atomic accidents are described. The 3 Miles Island, which did not cause too many problems, but could have caused a major problem, because the 3 Miles Island was 90 miles from Washington, D.C., and if there had been an explosion there with the wind in a certain direction, could have created a lot of problem in Washington. But then discuss Chernobyl and Fukuyama, which were major events, and both produced by uncertainty. In Chernobyl, great uncertainty on what to do when a certain experiment had to be conducted, and the guy who had created the Chernobyl believed that he could put a power plant in the Kremlin, in the Red Square in Moscow, because it was so safe that nothing would happen. But then when the technicians were faced with a series of events that they did not know how to deal with, then uncertainty came in and created this enormous problem, that a town of 50,000 people had to be evacuated, lots of people died, and a huge area of what is today Ukraine was left uncultivated, and so Fukuyama again, was something that could have not have happened in a technically very advanced country, Japan, and but it turns out that the event was created by a tsunami also of a certain height that nobody thought would happen. They had lifted the terrain by 20 feet or 20 feet, but the tsunami was more than 30 feet, and it was very unusual. So a combination of factors, and that, by the way, this brings me to a comment on, there's a push today to go back to atomic energy. After Fukuyama and Chernobyl, the enthusiasm for atomic energy was diminished dramatically. And but today there's Gates, the billionaire, has written a book advertising this, and at Glasgow there are some people who have been pushing. And by the way, France has been producing more than 50% of its energy through atomic power without having any problems. But again, probably also the point is made that atomic power station have become safer. But uncertainty is still there. Earthquake can happen when there is an atomic power plant. Terrorists can go. If the people who bombed the Pentagon and the tower in New York had gone against power plants, things can happen. So you can never really reduce the risk to zero. So this is the thing which are analyzed in the book. Then finally, the last part of the book, which in some ways more timely, is about what to do about climate change. The environment attracted a lot of attention, started attracting attention after World War II. Until that time, there was really very little. After the World War II, there were episodic connected to specific problems. One was lead in the gasoline. At the time, cars drove with used gasoline, which had a lot of lead. And I remember I was already in Washington in 1956, that in the summer you could take a handkerchief and clean your face, and the handkerchief would become all black, so that this started attracting attention. The damage that dams were making to the environment started attracting attention. Then there was an American biologist who wrote a book that became a world bestseller, Silent Spring, that made the point that rivers and springs and the creeks were becoming all dirty, and the water was being polluted. So the water that we were drinking had arsenics and all the thing. So there was the Club of Rome. There was this movement in Rome around 1970 of these people who became concerned that the growth of the economy in the world, that the growth of the population would lead to a time when the basic resources, mineral resources, etc., would be exhausted, and the world would no longer face a great problem. So they try to recommend a zero growth society. Well, a zero growth society would also have to come with a redistribution of income. In the US, those in the top 1% of the population probably consume 50 times more of the environment than the average person. So there are lots of problems of this kind that you need to be solved. Anyway, for a long time, the problem were, again, isolated problem. A problem of fishing, acidification of the oceans. But around 20 years, 30 years ago, people began to realize that there was greater problems, and the problem was global warming. That climate change was leading to global warming, and there was more and more of a connection between the global warming and the amount of carbon in the air. Using a lot of coal and a lot of oil and a lot of gas and a lot of methane and so forth. This creates global warming. It turns out that even eating beef leads to global warming, because the cow produce lots of methane, which is goes in the air and pollutes the air. So that we have come to a problem where a problem has become a global problem, clearly. This is a global public bad, not a public good, but public bad. The solutions still are national because all the policy decisions are made by national government. So we have again another area of economic, which is a stress in the paper I send you that you said you will circulate, Lekha, that we have this inconsistency. We have a lot of literature on the fiscal federalism, but fiscal federalism within country. But we need to really allocate a lot of time into fiscal federalism at the global level. What kind of fiscal federalism? If we had a global government as Mahatma Gandhi and Einstein and people like the Churchill in the 50s wanted to have, what kind of a role would they play? Clearly you could not have a global government with a free movement of people. Otherwise, a billion billion Indians probably would move to New York or San Francisco, and so you have a problem that you have to think about. What kind, if you had a global government, what kind of global government would you have? With what kind of limitation, responsibility? The thing that there's almost nothing on this. I've been writing occasional superficial paper for 20 years. Some are listed in the paper that I send you. Already 20 years ago, I was writing about this issue, but I still see no literature. Every time I'm invited almost every week to seminar about the fiscal federalism, always at the local level. Fiscal federalism within India, within the US, within Italy, and so forth. So that really this is the concluding problem. These problems are very difficult to solve. I mean, to tell India, it may come down to the choice between the growth, improvement in the standard of living, or people are still very, very poor in parts of India and so forth, and a better environment for the rich people, for the people who drive jets, who have their own private jets or yachts and so forth. So that they are extremely delicate problems that we economists, we claim to be smart, and we really should be allocating at least part of our brain to at least thinking about this problem, whether we can solve them or not. Now that the meeting in Glasgow was interesting, because countries have been told not to use coal anymore because coal is very bad, and but a country like India and China say, well, but we need the coal because if we don't use that, then we have problems with our poor people. So this is the problem that again I'll discuss a little bit in the book, and I hope that when the book comes out, people will read it and they will agree or disagree, but at least we'll have a debate on some of these issues. Well, maybe I'll yeah. And by the way, in the conclusion of the book, I quote an Italian poet that in 1862 or 63, he wrote a famous poem in Italy, which essentially said, "Advance, advance, O divine stranger. You know the room that the gods gave you. If there are still slaves and there's still poverty, it's because the earth is still young." So the concept of a progress, which was very fundamental at the time, people truly believed, with all the problem of slavery and all this. But in 1860, 1870, 1880, this view of that progress would solve the problem of the world was fundamental. Well, now I don't know whether you still believe in the progress. In the conclusion of my book, I wrote that there are two trains going into opposite direction. One is the train of the fundamentalists who want to clean the environment, they want to abolish coal and so forth. The other train is those who want to improve the standard of living of the poor. Which one of these train will leave the rail and let the other one go through is still a open question. So that's the, I think is maybe the conclusion. I will stop here, and I'll be happy to listen to some comments or answer some questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Prof. Tanzi. And I particularly enjoyed that point that economics of government, when the events are stochastic, that point I particularly enjoyed when the statistical models, when the events are unpredictable, and also the Glasgow meeting, that to phase out coal or to, phase down coal, of course, that's a very sensitive issue. And now, I would love to open the floor. I can see our former Professor Sudipta has joined. And I can see the former Finance Secretary, Government of India, Mr. Ajay Narayan has joined. And
could I add?
Tell me.
Just one last comment that
Absolutely.
has made me very pessimistic about where we are, and I should have added it to be. Is that we have introduced green energy. We are introducing lots of change, but still, for the next 20, 30 years, the amount of carbon in the air will keep increasing, will not stop growing, will keep increasing at slower pace, but will keep increasing. And carbon in the air stays there for hundreds of years. So that almost doesn't matter what we do today. The situation will still get worse. The glacier will still melt, the sea will still get warmer and warmer and will expand, and so that's really why I become pessimistic, that almost doesn't matter what we do, and if we do all the good things that unless we do them immediately today, and that's of course it's very difficult unless we stop burning coal today, unless we stop burning oil today, unless we don't eat beef today. And but we say, well, we become pure, but 30 years from now, by 2060 or 2050, that's too late. That we really will have more and more storm, will suffer some of the major consequences, and some area of the world, unfortunately, more than others. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I should have added this note.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, of course, the role of fiscal policy and monetary policy, where, it can go green. There's a debate that the monetary policy cannot go green because of the lack of toolkits. These are the questions quickly came to my mind. And now the floor is open and would love to get your questions for Professor Tanzi.
Yeah, by the way, I have a little bit of hearing problems, so please be a little bit more clear than you would otherwise be.
Absolutely. Yes, of course. The floor is open. Yes, Professor Parthasarathi, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to try. I'm not sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
I can hear you.
Good. Thanks, Vito. It was a very interesting talk. You started by saying differentiating risk and uncertainty, which I found, definitionally distinctive. And you said that risk you can see and plan for, but uncertainty is kind of God-given. I mean, you use that as a metaphor. In my thinking, isn't uncertainty also something that man can or woman can create? How? I would say, for example, in the case of taxation theory and practice. In taxation theory, tax incidence could be studied if you had risk in one way, but the uncertainty production function could show you how the incidence varied. That was done in the 1970s. And recently, for example, in India, we had a tax change, a law change, which introduced changes retrospectively. Now, if you really think of a business, given the tax law, it works out the risk model and says if the tax law suits its business decisions and operations later on. And within the risk model, the business also looks at any changes that in the tax law that can come in the future. But if you have retrospective law, then the tax law is changed today, which is applicable from some point yesterday, like 5 years back or 10 years back, or in the case of India, right from the beginning of the income tax law in application 1962. So the whole business model, which incorporated risk, collapses totally. And it makes it impossible, in my view, for businesses to perform. And it creates a world of uncertainty. So within taxation also, there are some ways in which we can differentiate between risk and uncertainty. Risk can be modeled by businesses, uncertainty cannot. And both are created by the those who actually draft the laws. So I just had a comment and wondered how you would perceive this.
Yeah, Parto, as you know, I've written a lot about complexity in taxation. You know, my recent book, The Termites of the State,
Yeah.
which was published by Cambridge University Press, I think it's an important book, and it stresses exactly that point. You know, complexity create uncertainty essentially, and that is this issue has led me to become more and more favorable to the Scandinavian system compared to the American system. You know, I was surprised to see some statistics, or I think for I don't know whether it was from Sweden or for Finland, that if you take the tax law and you calculate the tax burden following the tax law, and you look at the actual burden, there's almost no difference between the two. In the case of Sweden, if you do that for the US, you find a huge difference because of all the complexity, all the tricks, and all the things. And this has become a kind of a obsession with me. For example, in the case of programs, expenditure program, I wrote one time, I must have written a couple of papers on this, arguing that really my preference would have been. By the way, I wrote a paper for the meeting of the IIPF in Finland 3 years ago, and they looked at the paper and they told me that they would not publish it because it was not scientific enough, quote unquote. I was amused by it, you know. I sent a note to the editor. I said I didn't realize that economics had become scientific, you know. But the point was that in the expenditure side, my preference would be to take a country, have a personal how to say minimum income, which is distributed to everybody in equal amount, rich and poor. Everybody gets. You decide that 10% of the tax burden is reallocated on a per capita basis, on an equal base to everybody. Of course, if you are very poor, the percentage increase in your income is enormous. If you are very, very rich, is insignificant. And anyway, that would be also taxable, you know, so that you eliminate all the complexity. When I see, you know, I've been trying to follow the complexity of the programs in the US in the last year or two, you know. Larry Summers was now as changes of view, because apparently they spend in 1 year, they want to spend 15% of GDP on all these crazy programs that people were getting bonuses for this and that. This is really leads to complexity, leads to corruption, leads to termites. And so if I were starting de novo with a program, I would do exactly what I said. Eliminate by the way, the minimum income is always thought as an addition. No, I would take it as the first social program for a country. No, just do that and let the people then buy their education by, I don't know, in the case of health, maybe you can make some different have a different view. But essentially, going back to the question of simplicity, in that you have written a long book now on complexity in taxation. I've come to the conclusion that I taught public finance. I have a PhD from a top university, from Harvard. I had Musgrave people as my professors. I was head of the tax policy division of the fund. I ran the fiscal affairs department for 20 years. I was in the Italian government as undersecretary. I cannot prepare my income tax. I go to an accountant and I pay $2,500. He prepares a package which is that big that I cannot understand. I just sign, and then I mean, it's ridiculous. We don't realize how ridiculous the situation has become. So maybe I'm taking too much time. I would rather listen to the comments.
Yes, Professor Gondera.
Vito, that was a very interesting talk. We all enjoyed. Your talk on the distinction between risk and uncertainty. One is insurable and other is not, and of course going towards the global public good, namely the problem of the environment or the climate change. One of the things that has happened in the last couple of years is the emergence of pandemic. The pandemic itself is, in a sense, public bad, whether you call it externality or a public bad, whatever we want to or negative externality or pandemic bad. Of course, there are lots of research has gone on. Vaccines, but the issues are how do you really place? I mean, there are countries like India which have been sort of arguing that you should suspend the intellectual property rights with regard to these vaccines and things like that. How do you place it in the context of? I mean, this is not exactly a global public good, but it is an issue of externality. How do you really place this?
Yeah, well, this is a really very difficult question for me to answer now, because the situation obviously changed from country to country. But the main point that I want to make from my talk is that we have an increasing number of global public goods or public bad. Pandemics, the impact of pandemics is clearly one of this. If you have a pandemic, but the rich country keep all the vaccine and the poor country don't have the money to buy them, then you have a problem. You are not going to solve this problem, and you have a lot. So if you have global warming and you expect some country to do something, but others don't do it, it's the tax competition is another global public good. So there are so many public goods which have become global, and we are still not addressing them as a global public good. We still the power is still in the national government, and the national government make the decision. And of course, as one of my sons used to remind me all the time, that the golden rule, that those who have the gold that make the rules. I was the one who had the gold in the family, And so that's the problem. I think we as economists could do a better job by at least begin to think. In the book, I think I mentioned that the view in the 50s, that Gandhi and Einstein and all this, the stuff in a way endorsed was that if you cannot have a global government, at least you could have a group of global institutions, World Trade Organization, IMF, World Bank, UN, and so forth, which would be a kind of a proxy ministry for a non-existing global government. So we created all these institutions. By now there are hundreds of them, but their power, I'm not sure it has increased. The power has gone down rather than go up. So that so the problem will remain. The problem that will remain. But I think we have to do a better job than what we have done.
Any questions and clarifications? And I can see many young scholars here. We would love to ask a question.
Can I ask a question?
While we are waiting for the others, if you permit me, I just want to make a small clarification or addition on the retrospective taxation in India. While the law was passed in 2012, it took, but it has changed. It took a decade almost. In 2021, the government changed the law, recognizing that it is affecting foreign investment and investment. So, however, there are some glitches that still continue, but hopefully they will be cleared up and the era of retrospective taxation in India will finally end. So I just wanted to clarify that. So,
Parto,
yes.
I think that taxation should never be retrospective. You can change taxes for the future, but never for the past. So on that, I have firm views, and I find it very strange to hear that a government, including the Indian government, can change taxes for the past.
Yeah. Well, there are actually a lot of legal arguments and legal scholars who argue in favor because of government's very supreme position and all that. But I'm in total agreement with you, Vito, on that. Yes.
Yes.
Can I ask a kind of, I have a comment, Professor Tanzi. My name is Pinaki Chakraborty. I am the director of NIPFP. You have mentioned about the fact that global warming is going to continue in the long for the years to come, and we are also talking about controlling global warming in various ways, and there is these big discussions about carbon taxation. But for policy, I think it's very important to have a quantifiable kind of number. And if really we need to have a carbon tax, so for government needs a number to really implement it. And I think though there is a lot of discussion about it, but I think in terms of policy research or academic research, I think we still don't have a body of work that can tell us, yes, at this rate we should tax. So do you have any comment on that? That is the first. And second issue that I wanted to highlight is the issue that you mentioned, the fiscal federalism, the national government, and if there is something globally coordinated approach towards climate risk, finance, adaptation, so that we have a better world. But in case of federal countries, and India being a federal country, we are talking about, and some of the countries where we talk about per capita carbon emission is much higher than the rest. I think they're also very federal. So what are the kind of complexities that you think are going to come going forward when we coordinate in a setup which is federal vis-a-vis a country which is smaller in size and less complexities in management fiscally? Thank you.
Yeah, they are both interesting and difficult question. The first one, the carbon taxes. I've been following with a little bit of amusement the debate in the U.S. now. That Biden is very worried because the price of gasoline has gone up. If you are worried about the environment, you should welcome that, because people would use less gasoline and would put less carbon in the air. But the worry again is a standard of living, and the environment. Well, the environment can wait. If it's instead of the better environment comes in 10 years, but comes in 20 years, so be it. So that is very. You can see immediately the problem that we have. On one hand, if you put carbon taxes, which really make it very expensive for people to drive expensive cars, and then immediately we will get lots of complaints, and the other aspect, well, the other point that I want to make is that you cannot really solve the problem of global warming without paying some attention to income distribution, both income distribution at the global level and income distribution at the national level. As I mentioned, if you look at the US, where the top 1% of the population now has absorbed all the growth in the last 40 years, almost all the growth that there has been in the US has gone to the top 1% or 2%. So, and the normal workers have not received any increase. That's why you begin to have people now quitting jobs and all that. It's you see the problem that you have to worry about income distribution in connection with the problem of global warming, and of course this across country. India clearly has a point to make. We cannot introduce strict measures when Americans are still using 50 times on a per capita basis as much environment as the Indian do. And so these problems are extremely difficult, and I don't claim to have any solution. I just can point out that they are difficult. I can point out that we should be paying much more attention to them than we have done. But I don't want to penalize India for wanting to still use coal, if that's that's good to make the poor people of India better off. That's I don't know whether I answer your question.
Very much.
Professor Tanzi, I have a question. Lekha here. When we talk about the public policy perspectives, there's a take that greening of monetary policy is not that great. The argument is that the primary responsibility of monetary policy is price stability and financial stability, and monetary policy should not be messed up or with the climate change commitments or the climate change risk. But this argument can be quite refuted. Of course, I can understand in the European central bank context, Christine Lagarde is very positive about greening of monetary policy. But the argument is that in turn, the financial stability is affected by the climate finance risk. So the kind of the green stress test. Yes, somebody's microphone is on. Can you please mute that?
What happened?
Yeah. So that's my point. That's my question, because it is like it's more of a fiscal decision than a monetary policy decision to go ahead with the climate change commitments. But on the fiscal side, again, the policy is very fragmented. We don't have any climate responsive budgeting on board. If you look at the principle of subsidiarity, as you mentioned, in the context of the fiscal federalism, the kind of integrating climate change concerns within the budgetary concerns or within the intergovernmental fiscal transfer concerns, so that's not global or universally taken up in most of the countries. But of course, India led the ecological fiscal transfers initiative. So what is your take on these two policy perspectives and integrating the climate change?
Yeah, it's, on monetary policy, I share your view. I've been very critical of monetary policy, not only for the reason that, it has clearly is leading to inflation and so forth, but also on income distribution issues. People, the central bank have paid no attention or very little attention to income distribution. The argument has been that it's not in their mandate. Their mandate is full employment. If you promote a little bit more employment, this would be phenomenal for income distribution, which is nonsense. The U.S. has been very close. In the 60s, when I started worrying about economics, the full employment measure was 6%. 6% unemployed was full employment. Now we're at the 3%, and the central bank wanted even to squeeze more employment. They don't seem to realize that those who can approach the very cheap loans from the central bank are those who are in big institutions, the very rich. If a barber goes to a bank and wants to borrow money to open a barber shop, they don't pay 1%, they pay much, much more, If you borrow money with a credit card, I get from Citibank, where I have an account, I get every month some checks already printed that I can use them. And there's always an attachment which says you can use this loan for zero interest rate for the first 3 or 4 months. After that is 18%. 18%, when we are told that the interest rate are 1%. So I've been very, very critical, and the monetary policy should really stick to its function, which is keep the price stable, period, and let others worry about that, So all this, Christine Lagarde, she's the same person who gave 54 billion to Argentina, and I don't know when the fund will ever be repaid, So.
Thank you, Prof. Tanzi. Any more questions? Okay. So if you don't have questions or clarifications, let's wind up. The paper Professor Tanzi has already sent me, we will be uploading it in our working paper series. So it will be up in our website in a day or two. So you can take a look into these aspects in detail, the technicalities. And, Professor Tanzi, it's like, it's very enriching, the perspectives you have given to us, and looking forward to reading your book on fragile futures. And, we will be in touch with you because we are working on climate change and the fiscal policy, the risk perspectives in our institute. So we will be in touch with you, in the long term. And over to Professor Pinaki, you would like to say a word or two? Pinaki?
Thank you, Professor Tanzi. Thank you very much for this address to us. we will this perspective on underinvestment in uncertain events and overinvestment in risk is something, I think, a framework that can be used and analyzed, as Professor Shom also mentioned, about some of the issues in tax as well as on the expenditure side, and how it has I hope we should be able to take this framework as one of the important ways to look at data and see how we have done it in the context of India. And thank you very much for this this perspective and the discussions, and I look forward to reading the book, and we'll soon have the working paper uploaded in our website. Thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. Shom, for joining us. I also thank all my colleagues and participants from various parts of the country who joined and participated in this discussion. Thank you very much.